throughout book 6, somebody is watching humanity and commenting on it. Is it God? Is it the gods? Is it the remnants of the thinking machines? I'm not going to tell you, but I probably already gave it away.
Welcome back to the Vince Salerno Podcast. This is episode 83. Today we are finally showing you the last part of my near 3-hour discussion with Steve Baker on The Rise of Dune. This last part, we talk about quite a few interesting things. He reveals a story about a producer, Hollywood producer that he knows, who had some thoughts about the movie, the newer movies, and particularly Hans Zimmer's score. He talks about the last 2 books in the Dune story, written by Frank Herbert's son after he died. And if you don't know about the books and the story that continues after Frank Herbert died and how that legacy carries on, it's very interesting tidbits. He also gives more details about the differences between the 2 movies and how they portray the books differently and what he prefers, what he doesn't prefer. Again, Steve's knowledge of the Dune universe, he is literally a walking Dune encyclopedia. It really was amazing to see how he could pull from the smallest details and influences that Frank Herbert infused into this world that my generation in particular is just now catching on to. I gotta say, Steve Baker has probably been one of my favorite interviews I've ever done on this show, and I'm now scratching my head of how to get him back on. So maybe we'll talk about Dune again, or if he wants to, we'll talk about something else in pop culture. But again, please keep Steve in your prayers, and if you're able to, consider supporting Blaze Media and following his writing on there. He's still in the trenches, fighting the good fight, going up against the maelstrom of the federal government for these ridiculous charges for his presence at the Capitol on January 6th. So, yes, please support Steve in your prayers, in your donations, and just following him and following his stories and spreading his stories out there to people to read and to know what he is up to. But with that out of the way, without further ado, here is the third and final part of my interview with Steve Baker on The Rise of Dune.
You know, I used to be someone who did not like Timothée Chalamet at all as an actor. I thought, like, this guy's dressing up in women's clothes. Comes off very feminine and just, like, not very masculine. And, like, over the course of the past 2-3 years between the 2 Dune films, even the Wonka movie he did, I've quickly changed my mind to this guy is, not only is he talented, but he's got some range, and he really, like, I was already impressed with him in part 1. He blew me away in part 2 with his Paul Atreides.
Yeah, well, you that's where you and I definitely differ on that one. I was totally good with him in part 1, and totally not good with him in part 2.
He didn't sell you on his Paul Muad'Dib.
No, I did not feel he grew into the strong leader. Because look, he had in the book he had some character weaknesses that he was dealing with, but when it came time to step before the people, he was the Quetzalcoatl, and I never felt Chalamet got there. That's my opinion. I I think the only other you know 30,000-foot view difference between the movies that I really have anything else to add is I'll share an interesting reaction. So I've seen part 2 twice now, and the second time that I saw it with a very close friend of mine and his family. And this particular close friend of mine, I'm doing everything I can here to not give away his identity, except that I will say that he was a 30-year Hollywood executive. All right. And I'm not going to tell you who he worked for, except that I will say that one of his best friends is Hans Zimmer.
Wow.
All right. So he is very close. I've actually been at his house when he's been on the phone with Zimmer. And when we were leaving the movie, and I was in the car with his wife and his daughter and myself, and I started the process of doing. I said, "What was your impressions about this?" They've seen both films. Now, my friend and his wife have never read the book, but the daughter had read the book because I had actually gifted it. I had gifted it to her for Christmas several years ago. And she's a very brilliant young woman, and she always has a book in her hands. She's a bookworm, literary bug, and so she's very, very smart, very astute, and none of them liked the second film. They all liked the first film better. My friend, who is a 30-year veteran, I can tell you, I'm trying to not give him away because he's not a public person. He's not on social media, everything. I will tell you that he was with DreamWorks for 10 years. And I can tell you that I will also tell you that he has worked on some of those Disney Star Wars adaptations. So that's all I can tell you. He's retired.
Interesting. Okay.
He, being somebody intimately familiar with Hans Zimmer's process, was very, very critical of the music in the second film. He just thought it was way too bombastic, that it was an assault rather than complimenting the movie. That's his professional observation of it, and that's a guy that has insane amount of respect for his friend Zimmer. And then they all three felt like there was no payoff at the end of the movie at all. And this is my friend and his wife had not read the book, so they were actually the contrarians to most of the people that I've asked that question of. Those who didn't read the book or have never read the book, did you feel like you got a payoff? Most people said, yeah, but they had the same visual feast that I did. I mean, because it is. I mean, the movie is Dune 2 is just a visual, it's brilliant.
Feast for the eyes.
Oh yeah, it is. It absolutely is. It's incredible and deserving of 6 Academy Awards. Is that what it won? Nominated for 8 or 9 and won 6, I think. Yeah. So I think it was highly deserving of that. Are we talking about the first movie?
The first movie did, yeah.
Yeah. So the second one should live up to that, if not better. And and then again, I try to dispassionately remove myself from all of my personal criticism, respecting the fact that it is an adaptation, respecting the fact that my opinion means nothing in the larger scheme of things. And ultimately, people are buying tickets and they're going to see it multiple times, and they're going out and they're buying the books and they're screaming for Messiah to come out. Let's do it,
Yeah.
And I want it to come out too. I'm a fan. I want to see what he does with it. I want to, we'll circle back here in 3 years or whenever it comes out, and we'll do another one of these and see how we feel about it. But
right.
Maybe he brings it together in a way that is more complimentary to the book itself. But I think the Sci-Fi Channel had it right to combine Messiah and Children of Dune into one miniseries, because if you want to talk about an unfulfilling ending to a book, it's Messiah.
Oof. Okay.
there is no payoff there. There was obviously a trilogy in his mind at that point, if not the whole 6 book. But see, he had legal boxes full of he was universe building. Herbert was in the construction of this. By the time the 65 edition of the book came out, he had so much more material. It was mind-boggling. I mean, he had been developing Dune since 1959. He was a newspaper guy given an assignment to go out and write about the ecology of the Oregon dunes. And it was during his research into the science, because this guy's a smart dude. Never graduated from college, but he was a scientist. He was a philosopher, obviously an incredible writer. He lied about his age to get a job as working for a newspaper. All kinds of. He was a go-getter in a literary sense, but he was a scientist as well. And in fact, it is known that Herbert's IQ was higher than Einstein's, and and so that kind of lays the groundwork for who he was. So he was doing a scientific research assigned by a newspaper and as he started researching the ecology of the Oregon dunes, that's where the idea for this came. Ultimately, he never did the story in the newspaper. It was scrapped or abandoned or whatever, but he had like 1,200 pages of ideas, about this thing. And he's like, now his brain is but he was already an established science fiction writer as well. So he's working as a newspaper, but he'd already published as a science fiction writer. He had some short stories out and everything else. I'm trying to remember his first book. Was either late 50s or early 60s, and it was called. It was Under Pressure was the original title, and then the publisher republished it as, I think, Dragon Under the Sea. I have it in both covers and both titles in my collection, but I can't remember what year it came out. But he was already an established science fiction writer when he was doing this, so obviously his brain was already working in that direction. And I can just say, with the knowledge of what I know about his biography and his history from his son and other sources and from the Dune Encyclopedia, that already his imaginations of this universe were quite expansive, which leads us, and we probably need to, tie it up here, because I don't know if anybody's even listening to us anymore or not, but there was to be a 7th book, and he died unexpectedly and rather young. He was only 64, 65 when he died, and he had I think it was a pulmonary embolism after going through cancer treatments, and I think he had beat the cancer, but then the weakened blood vessels and everything, and he died rather suddenly. but he had set up Chapter House Dune, which was the 6th book in his series, had a major cliff. In fact, it was the biggest cliffhanger of all the entire series. Obviously, the 7th book was coming, and he died. And then it was years later when Brian Herbert, his son, and Kevin Anderson formed their partnership and started writing the prequels and the sequels. And they were going through all of the notes and all. And so as they're digging through all the boxes of Herbert's notes, they found an actual safe deposit box key, not knowing what was in the safe deposit box. They went to the bank, opened the safe deposit box, and found his outline and notes for book 7. And then they used that to end the story, because they had already written, God, I don't remember how many prequels and, midquels, if you call, and they had already done all kinds of stories based on the universe from his boxes and boxes and boxes of notes and files. But they did not have the conclusion until they found it in that safe deposit box. And when they found it, then they decided to write working from his notes, and they wrote a book 7. And so they didn't conclude it with one book. They concluded it with 2 books. So there is a book 7 and a book 8 chronologically in the timeline. But I will also go on record that of all of the Brian Herbert and Kevin Anderson prequels and other additions to the Duneverse, I'm most disappointed with how they ended the story. It was, even working from Herbert's notes, I see, because, and I'm not going to give a spoiler, but it's a little bit of it's okay. It's a little bit of a spoiler.
I'll probably forget by the time I finish it or get to the end. So,
well, what happened? Remember that the Dune universe only exists because 10,000 years before book 1, there was a battle throughout the known universe between AI thinking machines, robots, entire planetary societies of computers that were at war with humans. And the humans prevailed ultimately and made computers illegal. And at the end of book 6, somebody is watching from afar how the human race has developed because from book 1 to book 6, Chapter House, thousands and thousands of years take place. More thousands take place in the history of humanity. And I did mention already the spoiler that Duncan is there for all of them. And so by the end of throughout book 6, somebody is watching humanity and commenting on it. Is it God? Is it the gods? Is it the remnants of the thinking machines? I'm not going to tell you, but I probably already gave it away, is that it circles back. The problem is that by the time you get to the mid 80s, by the time Herbert died, we now had Terminator. We already had tons of other science fiction explorations into the problem of advanced thinking machine societies, or the problems of AI, the problems of robots that are out of control and at war with humanity. So all of these things that he was so far ahead of back when he started envisioning this in the late 50s and then publishing in 65, that which he was on the leading edge of that whole concept. By the time we got to his death, so many other writers were on that. So by the time Brian Herbert and Kevin Anderson finished the story, it was like I'm just saying, it was unimaginative. That was the biggest criticism I have. It was like, it just like fell flat. I think that if Herbert had been around and had survived to finish his story by, so he died in 86. So if he had finished it by 88, 90, something like that, he would have been able to adapt with the imaginations of the other science fiction writers of the time that were already exploring the problems of AI and runaway computers.
Mm-hmm.
And he would have been able to adapt to that and take his imagination and throw a trump card on everybody else. Whereas Brian worked from the notes he had at the time, and they just did not have the trump card.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they've done some great work. I could praise Brian and Kevin's work. There's several of those books I really thoroughly enjoyed. I enjoyed just going back into the Herbert's universe again and being able to escape to those worlds again in some of their prequels, and the prequels are particularly great because they are telling us why we got where we got, and they were working from Herbert's notes, so they were able to use their own imaginations to get there, but they did not have the kill shot to finish the story.
Well, that's too bad. I guess I'll have to. Yeah, we'll have to circle back after I've gotten a chance to read through those, and I'll comment on what you said about maybe Villeneuve bring it together with Messiah. I'd like to think, if he is such a fan of Messiah and everything he has said he's done in the past two movies is to get to Messiah, that he will probably knock it out of the park. That seems to be where his passion is. I'm actually more interested in where the franchise goes from there, because obviously, as you said, there's four more books after Messiah, and as far as I'm aware, Villeneuve is not planning on continuing to adapt after Messiah. So who's going to take up the reins after he decides to throw in the towel? Will they continue after that? My hope is yes. I mean, might as well try and make this as big of a thing as it can be.
Well, if this is the one thing you absolutely know beyond any shadow of doubt, if the franchise is making money, there will be another movie, or there will be another miniseries, or there will be another, HBO, Hulu, whatever.
A Duncan Idaho prequel, or
right. Which is written. That book is written by Brian and Kevin.
Oh, cool! Wow.
Oh yeah, no, that is already written. The story of Duncan is out there, and the story, the lost years of Paul Muad'Dib are out there. They've written the stories about the sister. They've written the stories about each of the great houses. So you have the story of the Atreides. You have the stories of House Carino, which is where the Emperor comes from. You have the story of House Harkonnen. So you learn through all of that, the backstories of the characters, like you get to learn about the real backstory of Gurney Halleck, of Duncan Idaho, of the Mentats. And the book of the Mentats is written, the Sisterhood. All of these things are there. And then the story of the Butlerian Jihad is 6 books. And they're big. I mean, these are not small books.
Wow.
I mean, they've done a lot of work. And I've read about their writing process and how they do it and how they get there. And are the two of them as good as Herbert? No. Not. I mean, it's not even a fair fight. Herbert's brain just, takes their brain down. His prose is infinitely better. It's infinitely more mature. It's infinitely more creative. His mind was obviously, they're working off of his genius to create what they did, but it's good. It's enjoyable. It ain't bad. I actually, as I said, I consider their conclusion to the story to actually not be good. Everything else I think is highly readable, consumable, enjoyable.
Yeah. That's
it ain't her. It ain't Frank.
Right. It's as close as you can get, I suppose.
Yeah.
So last question that we'll end on. What does Dune and particularly Frank Herbert mean to you personally?
I mean, if you get outside of my own spirituality, I would say Herbert's writing and philosophy is the second most influential over me. Now, this is really interesting when you think that you compare it to one of his primary influences is, Carl Jung and Jungian philosophy. And I find this highly I guess it's to me, it's no longer coincidental, but most of the authors and philosophers that I find interesting are typically Jungian philosophers, or Carl Jung was their biggest influence. You get a lot of that in Herbert's work. You get a lot of that in Jordan Peterson is, a unapologetic Jungian himself, and he has no problems giving Carl Jung credit for much of his own thoughts and how he arrives at his own personal philosophies. And I think that just not the Dune book, but overall, Herbert has helped shape much of my own view of our world, just as Peterson, another Jungian, has helped me be what I hope is a better man in the last 10 years. So there you go. There's my answer.
Man, I feel like I got more than I bargained for. We're definitely gonna have to cut this into 2 parts. This is a fantastic conversation. I feel like I've learned a lot in my infancy getting into Dune, and you've only fueled my interest even more. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate you taking the time to be on the show.
My pleasure. I actually did this from my secret bunker in Louisiana.
By the way, before you go, Liet Kynes' father was named Pardot Kynes, Pardot Kynes.
Yeah. I always pronounced it in my head Pardo, but Pardot, whatever.
Yeah, well,
so
either one works, I suppose.
Yeah, I gave it the French pronunciation maybe, but anyway, yeah. So I remembered that I had it right. I can't recall. And I don't know why this is, but was Pardo or Pardot, was he mentioned in book 1? I don't know why. I just...
So the only, I from what I remember, he appears in the scene the chapter where Liet is dying in the desert, and he appears as a hallucination.
Right. He's a hallucination, but do they ever name him did Herbert name him in the book? I can't remember.
I think he did. Because I remember, once I saw the name, I was like, oh yeah, of course it was Pardot Kynes. And I see. I read it not too long ago, so it's still fresh in there.
It's amazing how many times I've read the book. Obviously, I remembered the name, and it's amazing how many times I've read the book. But I've read so many of the other books, not just Frank's, but Brian and Kevin's, that I wonder, I can't remember sometime whether that aspect of a character or that aspect of their history was actually in Dune, or whether it was in one of the other prequels or sequels or whatever.
Yeah.
too much.
I believe it's just the one mention in the hallucination, at least as far as the first book is concerned.
Yeah. I remember, I remember he was introduced, but I don't remember if his name was introduced there or not. Anyway, but I knew about him. I knew that he was an off-worlder, and I knew that he was the previous planetary, ecologist, and that he worked for the Emperor like his son did, Liet, and that Liet bore Chani to a Fremen mother. And that Liet was fully Fremen, although he was in the employ of the Emperor.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Yeah, I will say really quick, I did find that jarring that Chani did not at any point in the movie mourn Liet, because my thought was like, oh well, okay, even if they race swap her or gender swap Liet, she's got to be her mother, right? And then it just never happens. So like, well, I guess that's that.
No, they never made the connection. And of course, this was the actress was a very dark-skinned black woman, and that would have been a hard believe for me, to do that. But it was, as I said, I just wish I wish none of this was even part of the conversation. For whatever reasons he did gender swap, and kind of, probably race swapped as well in one, with one character. If I'm reading the book correctly, that was also a race swap. And so I just wish we didn't have to even have these discussions. I wish it wasn't there, because if you talk about it, well, then you're racist, or you're homophobic, or you're blah blah blah, or you're
Exactly.
transphobic. We okay. When it's not necessary, it's just not necessary, And this was one of those ones where it's like, I've never seen Villeneuve do that before. It just wasn't necessary.
Yeah, I like to think his intentions were pure, and that he just maybe found that role would have been better suited in his adaptation as by a woman, because he's very understated about that. But he does talk about the he wanted to increase the presence of women in the film. So who knows? And yeah, like you said, the people who will cry about that, about bringing it up, are the same people who rage when you suggest Ryan Gosling should be the next Black Panther or whatever. So it's yeah, they have no self-awareness of how these roles should be portrayed if you want to pay tribute to the source material. It's just what's going to validate me, and like, I need to see me on screen or whatever. And it's like, if you really need to see yourself on screen, you can dig deeper beyond the least interesting thing about us as human beings, which is the pigment of our skin, in my opinion.
And when you cut this up, if you do, you might want to take some of what we're talking about here and bring it earlier into the discussion, when I'm really talking about it. But I keep thinking about other things, like for instance, when we're talking about Liet Kynes in the Lynch adaptation, it was Max von Sydow played Liet Kynes, and
right.
I thought he was brilliant. I thought he was just perfect because he was, he's obviously a Swedish actor, so he's white, but he was from a father of an off-worlder, and then, but see, they didn't, but that's why his daughter, who was played by Sean Young, Chani, whatever how you want to pronounce it, in the Lynch movie, she's too white, and there was nothing elfin about her at all. She's a tall woman, and that's why I thought Zendaya was perfect. She had the right skin tone, she had everything. I thought she was just absolutely perfect for that. But they completely left out her family connection to Liet Kynes, and then now talking about that, the Emperors both Lynch and Villeneuve decided to go with old men, all right, as their as their emperors. Whereas in the book, Irulan was very specific that both men, or that the emperor, her father, Princess Irulan's father, the emperor, was basically at the time of his exile. I can't remember whether the time of his exile to Seleucus Secundus was 72, or if that was at the time that he handed over the governorship to the Atreides of Arrakis. So it was one of the two. So he was either 70, but then we're only like 3 to 5 years apart anyway. So he was 72, but he looked 35 because of his spice consumption, his spice addiction. And again, this takes away from, which neither book or neither movie did well, was really drive home the complexities of spice. You never really understood that once you were addicted, you could never not have spice. That's how important. And there were billions of people addicted throughout the universe to spice. And if they were addicted, they were going to die without it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it ends space travel. There is no the mentat ability, the hyperdrive of the mind that came from spice.
Mm-hmm.
The ability for Bene Gesserit to become Reverend Mothers, although although in the book it's presented as drinking the water of life, they had figured out how to do that otherwise without the water of life, off of Dune. But there were plenty of things to explore in relationship to spice, and why it was, and of course the other thing is the comparative at the time is spice. The known universe, that's why the center of the universe was not the Padishah Emperor's planet, which I'm spacing, House Carino. The reason why Dune was the center of the universe is it was the only place in the universe where the most important substance was. And of course, in Herbert's mind at the time, what was the most important place on the planet in 1959 to 1965? You know the answer to that?
I don't.
The Middle East, the desert.
Oh, well, yeah.
Because of oil.
Mm.
It was not known. We did not know at the time that America had larger oil reserves than the Middle East does. We did not know at the time that Venezuela has the largest oil reserves. We just knew that the Middle East did. And that's why the Middle East was so important. It wasn't just the conflict between the Arabs and the Israelis, between Muslims and Jews. It was oil, the most valuable substance in the universe.
All connects.
There it is, and that's how that story came to life. Yeah.
Oh, wow. All right. Well, yeah, Steve, thank you again for coming on and talking about your love for Dune, educating me on some stuff about the world, and yeah, I guess it's a bright future for the bright future for the Dune franchise.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm excited to see where it goes. I hope they honor the source material. I hope they stay close to it. I hope that nobody gets a hold of it and goes too woke with it. That'll destroy me. I guess, as you know, Star Wars is about to do, lesbians in space, version or something like that. But
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a shame that we're at a place where that is more important than the story,
Yeah, it really is. It really is. But it only allows us the opportunity to go back and appreciate what once was, and at this point, that's good enough for me.
Yeah, and and as we have worked with people that advise this, go buy the hard copies of the books. you never know when the digital copies are also going to be rewritten.
Mm-hmm. It's true.
And localized. Yeah.
Right.
By the original. Right.
Gosh, God forbid.
All righty. Hey.
Well, where can people find you online if they want to support you and support your work? Where can they find you?
Well, obviously, they can pretty well keep up with everything that I'm up to at X, and that's at TPC4USA, at TPC, the number 4USA. And then my blog is on Locals. So I do private stuff there. It's free to subscribe to my Locals community, but there is an optional minimum of $5 a month to get, learn stuff about what I'm up to, what's going on with my own personal case, background on some of my stories that maybe hits the cutting room floor from my editor, that I might say names or talk about sources that aren't necessarily appropriate to put out on the blaze, but I may talk about them behind my paywall a little bit. So little things like that are happening over there, and that's the same address. It's just tpc4usa.com, tpc4usa.com. Same thing on Facebook. You can find me at tpc4usa on Facebook, tpc4usa on X, tpc4usa.com on Locals, and otherwise at the Blaze. And I've got my own URL there too. It's theblaze.com/truth, and that's where we are posting all of my stories about January 6th.
We'll be sure to put all that in the description of this episode. And Steve, again, it's been an honor. It's been a privilege, and we're praying for you. So thank you.
Thank you, Vince. Hey, it was great. I got to talk about something not January 6th related for 3 hours. Yay!
I'm very happy. I'm happy we could give you a chance to take a breather from that. So thanks again.
So am I. Thank you. All right.
And that concludes again my interview with Steve Baker on The Rise of Dune. Hope you guys enjoyed this 3-part interview. Thank you for watching and listening. If you liked this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel, where you can check out more episodes of the Vince Salerno Podcast, as well as on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thanks for watching, guys. Have a fantastic day, a fantastic week. God bless, and peace out.